Hey everybody, this is Alan Helton, here again to walk you through another demo of Memento. Today we're going to be talking about user sessions and how you implement one with a cache. What is a user session? A user session is a temporary store of data for when a person is using your application this time. Now, what kind of data goes into a user session? A user session contains data that is frequently accessed, frequently changing, and short-lived. Because this is data that really only exists for the duration that the person is in your app, it's ephemeral in nature. We don't need to persist it and bring it back the next time the person is there, which is perfect for Acorn Hunt, the game that we've been building on Memento Cache. So in order to build a user session, let's go in and take a look at our cache diagram and our architecture diagram for Acorn Hunt. You can see that we have a user cache, a game cache, player, chat, connection, and leaderboard. Now, if you haven't seen our previous demos, think of these caches almost as database tables. These store very specific entities and have different data types associated with them based on the use case. When we're talking about a user session, we're talking about the ephemeral data that is associated to a user while they're actively using the app. The context that we're going to have when we're talking about a user session inside of Acorn Hunt is game data specifically for that user. Now, if we zoom in over here on the user cache, you can see we're collecting 6 pieces of data. We have what's the current game that they're in, what's their WebSocket connection ID, when they sign in, what's their X and Y coordinate, that's where they live on the map that they're playing on, and what's their avatar. We also have a new dictionary in our game cache that stores the game tiles. A game map is made up of a bunch of different tiles. A standard map inside of Acorn Hunt is a 10 by 10 grid, and each one of those items inside of that grid is known as a tile. And when a person moves, they're going to change tiles. So we represent what is in every tile with this cache dictionary of XY coordinates that contains a JSON string of what's the tile type. Is it a player? Is it a tree? Is it an acorn? The username and the avatar. So with that in mind, let's take a look at how implementing a user session actually simplifies the endpoints that we've built. So here on the screen, we have 2 different sections of endpoints. We have in-game endpoints and navigation endpoints. The navigation endpoints, you can see add a new game and get a list of games. It also allows users to join and leave a game. I want to focus on these bottom endpoints first. The ones that say /games, /game ID, /players. Now this is a very standard REST pattern that drills in entities as we hit every slash. So we have a game entity which lives on top, and we have a game ID underneath it, and then we have the players collection of entities underneath that. What we're trying to provide to our users is a really nice developer experience. And what we don't want is to create endpoints that are really, really long, because those can be hard to integrate with. The more typing a user has to do, the more chances they have for a mistake, the more chances they have to be upset when integrating with your application. Now, what we can do is we can actually save that game ID on the user session so we can implicitly load it when a caller hits the endpoint. And you can see that we've done that on these in-game endpoints up here on the top. There is no /game ID on any of this because we're actually loading data out of the user session to grab the game that person is a part of. So we've simplified our endpoints by just saying post to /movements, /super abilities, and /leaderboards. And as a result, we have much simpler endpoints. Now let's take a look at what that actually is in the code. How do you implement a user session using a cache? All right, so I've loaded up Acorn Hunt backend, and Acorn Hunt is a Express app. And you can see here that these are all of our endpoint definitions. So you can see this is post to /movements. Now, when we want to authenticate or provide some sort of guard on endpoints, we can add functions into the endpoint definition here for Express. Here's where our user session comes into play. Validate has active game. Let's dive into this function real quick. Now what this function does is it goes and it loads the user session. Now the user session is a class that we've built in JavaScript that goes in, hits Memento Cache to pull from that user cache specifically for the username. And we're pulling out the current game ID, when they signed in, and what their WebSocket connection is. After we load that information from the cache, we save that in to the user session and return that back to the caller. After we've loaded the user session, we check, is there a game ID associated with this person in the user session? If there's not, we're going to go and return a 409, which is a conflict status code, back to the caller to say you're not part of an active game. Now, this is something that can be shared across all of our endpoints. And in Express, all you have to do is just add that function call right at the definition here. And we automatically get to reuse that code that pulls out of the user session, enriches the request context. Whenever I need anything like the game ID, we can now say the request user game ID and carry on. Now, how do we update that? One of the things that I said about user sessions is that they have frequently accessed, frequently changing data. Now, when we want to go and change that, one of the things that we're saving on a user is their X and Y coordinates. And whenever we hit this move endpoint, those coordinates change. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to actually be updating. We have the move logic up here at the top. And then when we've done all of our business logic verified, you can move where you are wanting to go, we update the caches appropriately. So you can see here that we're setting the new X and Y coordinates for the user. We're updating that game tile for the user. We're removing their old spot. So they were here, they moved over here. And then lastly, we're actually going to use Memento topics to publish to a WebSocket to actually push that movement down to all the players of the game. After that, the user session is updated, and every time we make a subsequent call, we can get that latest and greatest information for that frequently changing data. So let's see what that looks like inside of Acorn Hunt. I'm going to sign in as Nibbles. And I'm going to open up another session off screen so we can watch some data change. So the other person we're going to have is Mo the Squirrel. I'm going to create a new game. We're going to call this one Acorn Central. Okay, so we've loaded up Acorn Central. We have us, Nibbles, down here in the bottom. And I'm going to go in and join up in my other session so we can see that Mo the Squirrel comes in to our game. You can see we have our chat history over here on the right that says Mo the Squirrel joined. If we hover over Mo, we can see his username. So I'm going to move. And you can see that every time I move, it's pretty responsive. I'm moving pretty quickly. And every time I hit an arrow key, that's going through and it's loading that user session out of the cache. It's doing some business logic to validate that I can move. It's updating that user session, and then it's broadcasting a WebSocket to update everybody that's playing in that game. And that's all happening in a fraction of a second. So one of the big benefits that we're getting out of it, of implementing a user session with Memento, is this blazing fast response every time we make a move. You can see that it really isn't lagging at all. Every time I press, I see an immediate movement on the screen. And because of the single millisecond latency that you get when you hit with Memento cache, you get blazing fast response times for this frequently changing data. We're not having to make round trips to the database. We're not having to make updates and rely on streams. We're just hitting the Memento cache, which is a remote centralized cache that allows Acorn Hunt to scale. And we still have that same consistent sets of data at blazing fast lightning speed. Well, okay, that's it. Thank you very much for sticking with me on this demo of user sessions implemented with Memento Cache. Please let me know if you have any questions. This is a great unknown use case for caching. You don't always need to access a database, especially when your data is short-lived, frequently accessed, and frequently changed. The database can be removed entirely and just shoved completely in a cache for the entirety of its life. Thank you for sticking with me. That's it for me. Have a good one.